Thank you, Dr. Krauser. Um, and first, I'd like to say welcome to Ms. San Martin, Mrs. Hessen, and Mrs. Turner. Thank you for your participation on the board as a suburbanite. I really appreciate you doing what you're doing. I also find it interesting each of you have a background in education or educational technology. I'm interested to see what your input or what your questions might be on this subject. That being said, as far as the agenda for tonight, it's going to follow the same format we normally follow. I'm going to go through the design process and updates. We'll do schedule updates, and we'll do probable cost factor updates. Dr. Krauser pointed out it might be good, since everybody has a little bit of a different background, a little bit of different engagement in this process, just to take a step back and talk about the design process as a whole before we jump in. So this slide, if you've looked at those previous slides, this might be familiar. It really goes through the different steps of design. And in large terms, they are schematic design, design development, construction documents. And then from there, you go through the bidding process and permitting process, and then through construction and post-construction. Now, if we go back to schematic design, that's where we are in both of these projects right now, whether it's the high school or it's the intermediate school process. And what that is really big picture. We start that process by meeting with the educators, meeting with the administrative team, and really trying to define what the building looks like. You know, most of the schools in Pennsylvania don't come to us and say, we know exactly what we want. We need this many classrooms. We need this many education spaces. We need this in the front of the building and that in the back of the building. They come and they say, we have this many students. How do we serve that population? And we work with the administrative team. We work with the educators, and we create a spreadsheet of every single space within the building. And that's a process we've been going through. We don't just do that. We also work with what are the proper adjacencies for these spaces. How do they need to function? You know, if you have your special education spaces, what support do they need around them, and what's the correct adjacency to get the students from their classrooms there and back in the most efficient way to not take away from educational time? So that's a process we're going through right now, and that's kind of where we are. We've gotten that program established. We've put it to a floor plan. We've vetted that floor plan a couple of times, and we've really gone back to the drawing board several times. It's an iterative process to try and find as many efficiencies as we can. As we move forward, at mid next month, we'll be going into design development. That's where we really start putting, instead of talking about volumes and spaces, we really start to define the building itself, how it looks. We start working on the code plans, all that kind of stuff. Start doing it in a higher level of detail, and that's also where we engage the engineers on a higher level. So we really start talking about mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural, all of that. And in construction documents, that's the point where you take to the next level. It's basically creating the set of instructions for the contractors. So that set of instructions is what they use for the bidding process, which follows, which determines how much the building is going to cost. So the better the documents are, the more accurate the pricing is, the smaller that gap between the lowest bidder and the highest bidder will be, if it's better defined. Construction is self-explanatory. Post-construction is all that stuff that happens after the fact that we have to go back and make sure the contractor followed everything correctly, all the commissioning is done, the building's performing the way it should. Any questions on the process? Okay. As far as an update on the next slide for the past 4 weeks, we've been focusing mostly on the intermediate center, and I'll talk to you about why that is. We've been going through the programming and design meetings. We had 2 of them since the last meeting, one on the 4th and one on the 18th. That was today, earlier. We have also been having conversations at the high school. We've been doing this more on a programming level. It's a longer timeline for that project, so we've been spending more time trying to define that spreadsheet of spaces that need to be incorporated and try and troubleshoot some of the some of the challenges of the site. As we all know, we have a very tight site, and maximizing the best use of real estate that you have here. So we've been spending some time working on that before we provide a floor plan or an update as to that. For the next 4 weeks, we're going to continue the design of documents. We're going to be moving into design development. We'll continue the modeling, and what I mean by that is the 3-dimensional shape of the building. And we'll be doing engineering coordination, getting our consultants on board, and refining the site and building layout options. Intermediate school, if you were at the last meeting, you saw a version of this site plan. Yep. A version of this site plan. We have made minor edits to it. We've continued with the administrative team. Has anybody at the board not seen this yet or want me to walk through the concepts on there? Happy to do so. Okay. Modifications from the last meeting, we have made an attempt to maximize the play areas north of the building. I actually brought this with me today. The play areas north of the building here. We have actually modified some of the access throughout the site to try and take that secure play area, both paved and unpaved, and maximize the amount of square footage we have there for the students. In addition, you may notice that the building footprint has been reduced. I'll talk on the inside as we go through the floor plan as to what has changed that's created that, but it's also created more opportunities for expanded play area at the north side and parking and better receiving on the south side of the site. This is about as far as we're going to take this before we get our civil engineer to really take their pass on it and start doing the engineering work that they do. So I guess any questions as far as the site plan before we get that process engaged?
There was some discussion at our the last time you were with us about the traffic patterns coming in from the back. I just wondered if you'd thought about that or had any feedback about that.
Yeah, and that's the point where I really need the civil to get engaged. They have complete programs that do turning radius analysis with buses and all that kind of way beyond what an architect is qualified to do. So I need their input to take that to the next level.
Understood, and that's fine. I just didn't want it to get off my radar, so thank you. Yeah.
Correct. So right now the district owns a property that extends over here to, that's Sundale? Yeah. We know that we have access rights to that piece of land. I just can't guarantee if buses have the ability to take the turning radius off there. I know we're trying to talk about who has access on which side. Is the bus loop better up here? Is the parent drop-off loop better on that one? Vice versa. So there was discussion at the last meeting if there's any way that we could have the bus traffic and the parent traffic coming from two different roads that would help with congestion. So I'm going to be pressing the civil engineer on that subject. So right now the concept is to separate them on the same street because we know we can guarantee that. We'll keep pushing.
And I'll just comment on that. One of the, I'll say, discussion points relative to that is any of you who've been on Erland during that dismissal time, you've got cars loading on both sides, which then creates a double difficult turn, the kind of the Frogger mentality of students running across. But part of that goal is to get everyone off of that street, and I think it was Mr. Toman who actually mentioned that, and that has been our priority as well. Knowing that the parking lot and the flow of traffic would prevent that is number one, but to the point about can we have one of those two options, either parent drop-off or the bus, exit that top road, that's the question we have about can they make the left or right-hand turn as they exit the top of the building all the way up on Sundale. That will be the big question.
To the building. Is that green space? Is there a road next to that green space?
There's heading to the north of this photo, no. There's not a road. There's a road that you can left to get back out to Haynes Acres, but not a road to the right side.
It backs up to neighborhoods.
It backs up to the neighborhood, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Questions on the site? Then we'll shift over to the building floor plan. So one major change that happened here from the previous meeting, and this actually came out from some of the community input we got at the advisory committee meetings where we had parent-teacher participation. One of the questions was, is there any way to bring some of the specials up to the second floor? And previously we had had them kind of wrapped around the gymnasium down here. And in exploring that option, we actually have moved some of the specials, the STEAM and the art here, up to the second floor. The adjacency of media and STEAM is a natural adjacency. There's often, in a lot of education programs, we have that actually as a folding partition wall where it can be expanded into and out of. And the whole STEAM suite here, keeping these two together, makes a lot of sense. Now, it conveniently fit on top of a piece that was already there, so that's partially on top of the cafeteria and on top of one story stage that supports the cafeteria. So we're able to achieve many of the goals that we were trying to achieve before, high volume of the cafeteria in this space, use from your STEAM down at the cafeteria, and the center down at the cafeteria. And then it brought this entire piece of the footprint out of the first floor into the second. It makes it more efficient cost of construction whenever you're not building more foundations. In addition, one of the other major items that we changed here, you'll notice, I'll show you the square footages here in a second. these learning labs here on the first floor, they were nestled in the heart of each one of those wings, each one of those educational wings in the previous design. And what that meant is we had 6 of them in the previous design in the program, and that was increasing the square footage. And we had mentioned in the last meeting we were tracking square footage, and we were looking for ways to mitigate some of the increasing square footage. And Ms. Potts, if we scroll down just a little bit, we'll have the square footages there. So the study started at 120,000 square feet. In October 23, it had increased through that gathering of information, gathering of spaces, meeting with educators, meeting with an administrative team, to 129. When those learning labs, the authentic learning labs, were incorporated on each level, then that grew even more, and that was in the November meeting, to 136,000 square feet. Now, through making these moves, and in addition, taking that health classroom and eliminating the health classroom, since it can be delivered in the classrooms and not have its own separate space, that gets us back down to 127,000 square feet, which is within a stone's throw of the educational program during the study phase. I'm comfortable with being within 7,000 square feet, more or less, of where we were in the study, because we are yet to go through finding efficiencies in, let's say, the kitchen, and I have a whole list later in the presentation of other items, other areas we're looking for more efficiencies that don't take away from the educational program. Yes.
Use your microphone, please.
I'm concerned, and I'm sure when I ask this question, it's going to add square footage. But we're back to the good old gymnasium and stage. That means every time you want to present something on the stage, you got to have somebody putting those chairs up and taking the chairs down, or whatever it is. I mean, that seems to me a step backwards. You know, I mean, that's what they face doing now.
Yeah, and that was one of those decisions made early in the process, trying to combine spaces to create a more efficient program, more efficient cost of construction. There's often a decision if it's a gymnasium stage combination or if it's a cafetorium situation, and this one landed in the gymnasium stage. Is that something we need to explore? Is the cafeteria more advantageous?
Well, I don't know. I'm sure you've had.
Dr. Furman is raising her hand.
Yeah.
Larger volume there, so we wouldn't necessarily need chairs for every single student, having that feature option to look at that.
All I would say was anytime you have a program and parents are involved, you don't want bleachers up, that's for sure.
There would still be the need for some chairs,
Yeah.
but the features wouldn't necessarily climb to great heights of the.
And then you have storage issues too with the chairs that you're going to use. That takes up space, I know from our experience down at Yorkshire.
And there is table and chair storage planned in this facility.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just curious.
I would play devil's advocate here and say if it were in the cafeteria, I think you'd still have to set up tables and chairs. It would just be folding up the cafeteria use chairs and tables and taking out others.
And obviously you go and have separate auditoriums, you know.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
As nice as that sounds.
Yeah.
That's just, but this just seems to me to be the past, that's all.
I have a question, and I know you are an expert on this. So, the open space above the cafeteria, I'm thinking how loud that's going to be when children are in the cafeteria.
Actually, the higher volume is actually going to help with some of the reverberation and noise. And we have many strategies.
Oh, okay.
We have many strategies within that higher volume. Ceiling clouds, absorptive surfaces. A lot of these things we employ as we're designing those spaces to help the sound not become a noise chamber.
Okay. Microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. I think middle school students.
Thank you. Throwing things over the open area. Is there a plan to prevent that? Well, upper element 3-5, right? Throwing stuff for sure. Oh, this is open. Let me throw it over here.
Well, when it says open to below, that doesn't mean it's actually physically open from the second floor as in somebody can throw something. It just means on a second floor we typically label it open to below so you know there's a volume there.
Okay.
So really what you'd be seeing What we've done here in this STEM lab and the media center, we'd probably put windows in those walls so that you have some shared views coming out of those classrooms into that cafeteria space. The media center can look over that space. Those kind of open to blow opportunities.
And how about the outdoor learning spaces? Are we envisioning something more than just grass?
So actually, I've heard from facilities they don't want grass. If we can have as minimally maintainable as possible. So with our civil engineer, we're going to be talking with them, and we've done several of these. I can share photographic examples at varying levels of some of them have mulch and stoned paths. Others have large learning areas outside. Others are actually turfed because you want that kind of green feel and sit down and enjoy it, but not the maintenance that comes along with it. So we'll be having all those discussions and do some visioning exercises.
Steve, you were going to ask something.
Well, okay. I'm glad Dr. Hessen brought up the question about because I was visualizing it honestly as an open catwalk.
Kind of like Yorkshire, like a Yorkshire.
As an open catwalk above areas where students congregate, which I have to say I don't love from a security standpoint. But it's not that, and that's fine. What was I going to say? No, I think that's fine for now. Oh, was this one of the sites where we were close to the permeability limit in terms of the paved surface? I know they varied widely by the different sites that we looked at, and I've lost track over the several years that we've been having these conversations about where it was okay to have more parking lot or less parking lot, or so. Thank you.
Yeah, we are close, and that's something our civil is going to be looking at very closely as they get involved in this. Okay. Any other questions on the floor plan? Then, as far as the schedule goes, this is the same schedule that we've reviewed to date. Obviously, the high school has a much longer schedule. We're still going through that programming, kind of wrapping that up here at the turn of the year, and going to be starting exploring floor plans and schematic options for the high school. That's the bottom bar there. The intermediate school, we have received input back from our civils that we've talked to. It does look like their process might be a bit longer than we had anticipated. They have not given us dates yet. So when I come back next month, we're going to have some updates in a lot of areas, and that's going to be one of them. When they start giving us hard dates for their reviews, then we're going to start incorporating that into the schedule. But at this time, I don't have enough to do anything fruitful. All right. Then the next slide, this is the kind of tracking of cost factors. Items that might have a cost impact on the project. Now, I say cost impact because we're tracking them. We're not saying these are guaranteed items. We're just trying to wrap our heads around things. So when I do come back with a budget update, it's not a shock as to the reasons why. So we always try and talk about the reasons why at each meeting and keep you informed. So the high school, again, we are still trying to work on some of the options there as far as defining the program. So this really hasn't changed in the high school, but the intermediate school, you'll see there in the red, the two numbers there, the 127,000 square feet as compared to the 120,000 square feet in the study. Now, underneath of that, I have the explanation as to why. The Intermediate Center has decreased from the November 23, and that's due to those authentic learning labs. Each of them were 1,800 square feet and then had associated storage with them of 400 square feet each. So taking those from 6 down to 2 for the total building has significantly impacted the square footage. In addition to that, each of those comes along with grossing factors, walls, circulation, all that kind of stuff that, again, helps in the reduction of that square footage. This is where I also go and say our areas to explore more efficiencies. I don't want to take away from the educational program. I feel like we are there with the education program. What I'm going to be looking at is circulation of lobby space, making sure that's appropriately sized. You want it large enough to handle that holiday concert or major event that you may have, but not so wide that it's a waste of space. Classroom sizes, we had factored in 850 for classrooms during the study phase, and through exploration of furniture layouts, we're coming in right around the 850 square feet for each classroom, and we're coming in at the 900 square feet after exploring interior design layouts. So that's one thing we're just tracking. Where I'd really like to see some of the savings is in the mechanical square footage and the food service square footage. So as our engineers get on board, they start working on layouts, we're going to be able to start tightening those boxes and hopefully realize some savings there as well.
Is it up to your engineers then to decide where the heating goes? And I know like at Yorkshire, we put everything inside and I think it's taken up more square footage than we ever realized.
Yeah,
for the
and
heat pumps.
we have done this model before. Winding Creek and Mountain View, those are two examples. We're going to recommend sticking with those kind of systems that we had done on those buildings unless facilities has a major objection to it. But it did have some rooftop equipment, and it did have, I believe Mountain View had a chiller on site as well, a cooling tower on site as well.
Okay, because we gave up a lot. I was concerned I'm thinking geothermal wells, or not going to do that.
I will have more engineering run a analysis for geothermal.
Okay.
It's going to be extremely hard on this site because in order to have a geothermal well field, it's pretty much the footprint of the building.
Mhm.
But you remember what's next to our building is the existing building. So to have a building up and running with a geothermal well the size of the building on this site is going to be nearly impossible.
Just curious, that was all. Thank you.
Anything else for Mr. Wentz?
Just a quick question. I just noticed that for high school grade levels, it has 8 to 12.
Typo there.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I didn't miss something.
Anyone changed that already?
Thank you for pointing that out. All right. If there's nothing else, that concludes the update. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wentz. And as he had shared, as we begin the process to engage some of the engineering work, we'll be communicating. We've been working quite a bit with Ms. Bedell, but we'll be communicating. We're anticipating at some time that we kind of start to begin to poke around on the site to investigate a little bit more at that civil engineering. So Dr. Laura Fink and Dr. Furman and I were having conversations today about getting some communication out to East York and the families in around that area to say that, it won't be surprising to begin to start to see some equipment as we start to investigate that site more closely in the coming months and look more closely. And I see Mr. Wentz coming up to give us an update on that.
Yeah, and what Dr. Krauser is referring to is the geotechnical investigation. So what we do is we test the ground for two things: for water percolation, so we know the infiltration of the water on the site, and we also test for the soil stability. So they're going to be doing two things on site. It would be digging test pits and then testing it for the perks, and then drilling cores into the ground in certain areas for the foundation. And that way we know how much the structural engineer has to design for as far as soils. It also helps, it doesn't guarantee, but it helps detect any sinkholes if they are on site ahead of time. We are in a limestone prime area, and prone area, I should say, and sinkholes are always a concern. Doesn't guarantee, but we try and pick key points around and spread them out enough that we can try and find any if there are. So that's what we're talking about. It's not construction, it's just investigation.
So again, another opportunity, we begin to build those relationships with Spring Spray Township, the township office, and really begin that process to investigate a little bit more thoroughly. So that's to come.